ChessTeacher, lately you've been spoiling us with wonders on the chessboard. Amazing games, especially with great lessons to learn. I hope we don't lower the bar today. Well, if I tell you that today I prepared a video that's going to fascinate you, and that's exactly why I brought out a special edition board. How does that sound? Pay close attention, because we're about to see a game where Alexei Shirov, playing with the black pieces, makes some moves that are really worth talking about. And above all, there's a lot to learn from it. But more than anything, I want us to put ourselves in the shoes of the player with the white pieces. Not to give too much away, but so you can see the thought process behind every move. I'm sure this will be really helpful for your own games. In this game, which, if I don't forget, I'll leave for you as always down in the description, Shirov was playing with the black pieces, and the player with the white pieces went for a queen's gambit. It's an opening that I'd say is especially common among players who open with the queen's pawn, right? There are a lot of possible responses here. Many people are afraid to face the queen's pawn, but don't worry. If we stay calm and really understand the concepts, it doesn't matter at all what our opponent plays. We'll know exactly what to do. The idea is that here we can play, for example, e6. We could accept the gambit, or we could play c6, which is what happened in the game. We could have played knight to f6. That's not really the important thing. What's important is understanding the plan behind it. White plays knight to f3, black plays knight to f6, e3, and bishop to f5. Pretty standard, right? A completely conventional development. White is developed in the queen's gambit style, and black, well, they're developing the kingside knight first and now the light squared bishop. Why? So they can play e6 and not end up trapping this bishop inside the pawn chain. It's that simple. You following me? If we play e6 first, this bishop won't have the same life because it will only be able to go here. On the other hand, if we develop it first and then play e6, this bishop has a much better diagonal. White continues with knight to c3, a standard development, and now Shirov can finally set up his pointed pyramid on d5. This way, he can develop all his pieces. His two minor pieces are already developed, and the other two can be developed without any problem. For example, with the bishop to d6 and the knight to, say, d7, right? However, white also has good development. The light-squared bishop can go either to e2 or d3, aiming for a bishop exchange, and the dark-squared bishop can come out for now via d2, or, if preferred, even along the diagonal, from b2. So at this point, since white has noticed that this bishop is already moved outside the pawn chain, they do something very typical, which is to attack this bishop in order to win it. Pay attention. At this moment, black can't save the bishop. There's no square where this bishop is safe. You see that? It's okay. This is something typical. However, if you like, for example, to play with the pair of bishops, which is normal, you should first, before the bishop gets trapped, you should have played h6 first, so that later the bishop has a safe spot on h7. At this point, Shirov thought he could give up his pair of bishops, because white would have to waste several moves to capture this bishop. A little trick I'll share with you for when you face this kind of attack, it's much better to let them capture your bishop on g6, way better, of course, than on f5. Although 5 also has its own ideas. Something I really like when they capture me here on f5 is that these two pawns, both the one on d5 and the one on f5, are aiming at the e4 square. And as you can see, a knight here could be really strong, especially with the support of another piece. It's true that they'd have doubled pawns, but that wouldn't really bother them much because they're simply putting a lot of pressure on the center. However, it's always better to place the bishop on g6, since after the exchange, we capture with the g-pawn and whether or not we castle. Because then we'll have the open file for the rook. And if we do castle, as you'll see in the game, which is exactly what happened, these two pawns become super strong, defending the castled king and not letting anything through the h-file because they cover it really well. And of course, friends, nothing gets through the g-file either, since these two doubled pawns together with the f-pawn make for a solid reinforcement. It's important to mention this because if the f-pawn weren't there, these two doubled pawns would actually be isolated, and that's a problem. That would be a serious weakness, which would definitely not be good. However, at this point, Shirov didn't play bishop to g6 when white played knight to h4, threatening the bishop. Instead, he made the very interesting move bishop to e4, and it's worth pointing that out. Because surely at this point, you're probably wondering, why does Shirov move the bishop? He wastes the tempo moving the bishop if it's going to be captured no matter what. Plus, we said that if you're going to move it, well, move it to g6, because that way you'll get this really good structure by capturing with the h-pawn, right? Well, the idea behind placing the bishop on e4 is that if white decides to capture it with the knight, which seems pretty logical, right? That's probably what most of us would do, but black doesn't want to capture it with the knight, but what they actually want to do, check this out, it's really interesting, is capture with the pawn so that the knight on h4 is left out of play. It can't go to f5, it can't go to f3 thanks to this pawn, and of course it can't go to g6 either. So the maneuver white should make here is to play g3, reroute the knight through g2, and that's a pretty significant loss of time, where black has managed to get a strong center. Even though this pawn might look pretty weak, it can probably be reinforced by moving this knight and playing f5, and black would end up with an extremely good position. So look how interesting this bishop to e4 move by Alexei Shirov is, right? Probably very few of us would have thought of it. And if someone played it against us, most of us would probably just capture that bishop, wouldn't we? So here, the player with the white pieces, given his high level and deep understanding of these kinds of positions, played f3, pushing his bishop away, mainly bothering it so that it has to retreat to f5 if you're lucky, or to g6, which would be the most normal. The great thing about these videos is that in each one, besides enjoying select games, since I always try to make sure the examples are super entertaining, I especially try to make sure you learn a ton from them. That's why just by watching free videos, in each one of these videos, we get to learn a ton, which helps us improve our chess skills and, of course, become better players just by watching free videos. But if you want to take it a step further, you should join the Academy. I really value your time, believe me. I've been in the same situation as you. So I understand that a lot of you are afraid to pay for an academy, right? Because what if I don't like it? Of course. What if I pay for an academy and then I don't like it? Well, then I've lost that money. All right, don't worry. Of course, I only want happy students in the academy. First of all, you should know, for anyone living under a rock or not used to watching these videos, that inside the academy, you have classes like this one, but longer and more in depth every week. And you also get full access to Chess Mind. Oh, by the way, the classes aren't just mine. We also have classes from FIDE Master Flavia Canciobello, who explains things wonderfully. I personally chose her to be part of the team, as a teacher in the academy. So where am I going with all this, chess teacher? You're being a bit much. It's that I don't want you to take any risks, so you can try it out for a whole week, all inclusive, for just €1, okay? For just €1, you'll get a full week, 7 complete days of the academy with everything included, everything included. So it's up to you. If you say, look, chess teacher, I didn't like it, you know what? I'm not going to continue. Well, that's fine. You just spent €1 for a week at the academy. Hey, chess teacher, I really love the academy. Honestly, I want to stay. Well, then you'll be more than welcome, of course. And we'll keep training long term until you decide it's time to finish. So if you're interested, I 100% recommend it. I'll leave the link down below in the description, okay? That way you can join with the 1 week for €1 promotion. I recommend it to you 100% because you have nothing to lose. You just invest €1. And if you don't like it, I'll give it back to you, okay? And then, of course, I'm going to get in touch with you to help you with everything related to the academy. Back to the game, since I tend to ramble. I'm a talker, but I do it for your own good. At this point, the bishop retreats to g6, better than f5. Why? Because we've already seen that capturing on f5 wasn't as strong as capturing on h, especially now that the pawn on f3 is covering the e4 square, and we won't be able to place a knight there. A knight right here, where we saw before. Do you remember? That's why Shirov retreats the bishop to g6. Since this bishop can't go anywhere, it's stuck here and can't move. At most it could go to h5 and we could chase it away, so there's no rush to capture it. If at some point they play, for example, h6, then we would capture, and with a much better result, because by capturing, this pawn on g6 will become super weak, and with either queen to d3 or bishop to d3, we could start attacking it. And watch out, because the opponent's pieces could end up way too weak. That's why it might actually be better to wait for them to weaken themselves a little more, and the player with the white pieces plays queen to b3, creating threats on g6 and b7. Well, for now it looks good, but Shirov has everything calculated. Queen to c7 simply to defend the b7 pawn. The game continues with bishop to d2, a normal bishop development. There's no rush to capture on g6, as we've said. They can capture whenever they want. Bishop to e7, developing the last pieces. The player with the black pieces, Alexei Shirov. And now, the player with the white pieces finally decides to capture on g6. It could have waited longer, of course. There wouldn't have been any problem. And now, h takes g6. Without a doubt, capturing with the h-pawn is much better. You should know that the h and a pawns are the least valuable pawns on the board, since they can only capture toward the center and not outward. All pawns, let's say, are worth about 1 point, and the side pawns are simply worth 0.7. The player with the white pieces decides to castle off. What's the idea behind this long castle? At first, it feels a bit risky, doesn't it? At least it seems that way to me, since the king's pawns are pretty far advanced. The idea is to move the king to b1, something I recommend not just in this position, but whenever you castle long, the king is safer on b1. Those of you who are longtime viewers of the channel will understand and know that it's happened to me many times. Because I was eager to attack and didn't move the king to b1, I ended up in trouble later on. So I always recommend that you take the time to move your king to b1. He'll always be much better off there. And the good idea for the white pieces is that since black is going to castle short in the next few moves, as that's already expected, maybe you can launch an attack on the king side. Whenever the castlings are on opposite sides, it's always a fierce battle, where, in this case, white will try to attack on the king side, and black will attack on the queen side. Black continues developing a last minor piece, moving the knight from b to d7, and now white, even though it might seem counterproductive, captures on d5. A lot of you might be thinking, why would they open the file where their king is? And it's really interesting. The idea is that if they don't, black could do it right away and then put pressure with b5, you see? If now they capture here and then continue with b5, black is gaining a lot of tempo, and it really seems pretty dangerous. Although it's also true, right, that by capturing on d5 ourselves, black's chances to launch an attack on this flank don't seem any less, do they? If I ask how you'd capture on d5, what would you choose? The knight, the e-pawn, or the c-pawn? Most would think like me and take with the c-pawn, which is exactly what Shirov did. It wouldn't be a bad idea to capture it either with the knight or with the pawn. If we capture with the e-pawn, notice that we have a 4 versus 3 on the king side, which is also very interesting. But of course, it seems much more tempting, right? To capture with the c-pawn and definitely open up the c-file so the queen can start attacking the king on c1. And not only that, but for example, the rooks could also join in along that file and create dangerous attacks. And that's why the white player, quite logically, plays king to b1 here. You get it, right? What exactly is he doing? It's the move we always say is good when you've castled long, but now it makes even more sense. The c-file's been open for the black pieces, and the attack is imminent. That's why now, after a 6, the move I call the catapult move, because it helps catapult the b-pawn into the attack, right? The book pawn can't be pushed because it would be captured now. So the move of 6 is the launching move, so its partner on b can go straight into the attack. Well, so here, look at how white has recovered with castling. They've gone from this position to this one here. It's a really interesting position, where now it's white who's mounting an attack on the c-file, and that's why black decides to pull back their queen. It might seem like this queen is going to end up on a kind of odd file at first, right? Because it's blocked by its own pawn, and on top of that, it keeps the rook from coming out. But the plan for black is clear. If we understand the plans in this position, our chess will definitely improve. The idea is that they want to push, of course, the a and b pawns since we have opposite side castling. Even though black hasn't castled yet, it's clear that in the next few moves they're either going to castle short, or if not, leave the king in the center. That's why these two pawns are definitely going to be used for the attack. And, of course, the queen and then the rook will also be freed up and work together to go on the offensive. Well, white is going to do the same thing. H4. With what idea? Well, H4 has an interesting idea behind it. First, this pawn on H2, for those of you who pay close attention, you probably already noticed, is being attacked by both the queen and the rook. So it doesn't hurt to move it if we don't want to play a pawn down. Even though it wouldn't be too dangerous either, since it's the farthest pawn and would open up lines for attack, it's always better not to just give it away, right? Especially when we don't have anything better to do. And instead of H3, H4 seems better. That way we also control the dark squares. Otherwise, we'd have these three pawns on light squares here, which would leave a lot of holes on the dark squares. It's also really good to coordinate a bit of control between the dark and light squares. B5 from Shirov, he's launching the attack. And now, a super interesting idea that I noticed, this game is full of really fascinating ideas that I definitely recommend to all of you who have the time, just if you have the time. Thank you. I highly recommend saving this video so you can review it several times. I even suggest that while you're watching, you go over it on a chessboard or play it in the background on your TV a few times, for example, because it's really interesting to see the game a second time. It's when we notice details we didn't catch at first, and everything definitely sinks in better. Now, if you don't have time, that's totally fine too. Also, it's helpful to save it or you won't find it later. Which video was that? I don't know. Boom, it's saved. Perfect. Check out White's idea. Super interesting. A 4 to stop that attack. A lot of you might say, hey, the player with the white pieces, honestly, ChessTeacher is going a little crazy, just like you, because he's opening himself up completely, right? Exactly where he's going to get attacked. But anyway, this move is really interesting because if black captures now, after queen takes queen, rook takes, and for example, knight takes a4, black is left without the queen to attack, and white's pawn structure would be much better, since this pawn on a 6 is going to be very, very, very weak and can be captured easily. This knight is going to land on e5, and the position, watch out, would actually be better for white than for black. Also, keep in mind, white is playing against Alexei Shirov, a true genius, and they probably want to trade queens, right? That's why they proposed this exchange. But of course, Alexei Shirov ignores it and castles short. You'll see that in the end, Shirov is the one who ends up winning the game. Sorry for the spoiler, but even though it sometimes looks like white has good control, in this case, it's black who controls the position. Let's take a look. Since white's already castled, they'll close things up, so you definitely can't open the position up on them, right? Closing the position where you want to attack me is always a good sign, no doubt about it. Check out Shirov's interesting attack. He starts with that queen, which I set up lying down. I'm recording at a weird angle for a better view, sorry. The queen is placed on b8 and the two rooks on either side, on a8 and c8. What they're doing is positioning themselves on the files where, most likely, those files themselves aren't actually going to open up. And you'll see what an interesting plan Shirov has. Bishop to e3 with the white pieces, the queen comes in to attack on the king side, and they're targeting the g2 square. And a lot of you might say, hey, it's fine to let them capture that pawn, because then we bring the rook in and open up some lines. But be careful, that doesn't always work. In this case, we'd be opening a file with double pawns that are reinforced by the c-pawn, where the king is extremely safe, and we just start losing pawns for no good reason. Plus, the counterattack isn't so clear, so it wouldn't be the best option. That's why here, the player with the white pieces, staying consistent with their logic, tries to defend his g2 pawn so it can't be captured. And with the crook or the harak, with the crook because we want to attack on the king side. So we want to have our rooks on the king side, just like Shirov did on the queen side. And the game continues with a brilliant move. Rook to c4. These are the kinds of moves that are hard to understand, especially when you're just starting out. Why put the rook somewhere it can be captured by a bishop? So why does Shirov give up the exchange? Very good. An exchange is a 2-point gap. The rook is worth 5 and the bishop is worth 3. Let's see if that's compensated. If this rook were captured, Shirov would have recaptured with the b-pawn, and not only would he have an extremely strong structure and attack the queen, but he would also open the b-file, which would directly attack, now for real, the b2 square, of course, and also any pieces that end up on that file, right? And the attack could be truly lethal in exchange for the exchange. It would probably be a devastating attack. They also have the bishop along with the rook and the queen, which can be repositioned. That attack looks like it would be extremely strong. Can this rook be captured? Yes, but you have to go about it very carefully. Probably nothing would have happened by capturing it, but the white player would have had to defend tooth and nail. In this case, the white player, knowing he was playing against Shirov, said, look, you know what? I better not open up these lines of attack for him, and I'm going to stick to my plan with this four. The idea is to try to box in the queen a bit here, so there isn't a strong attack. No doubt. Watch how Shirov continues because his plan is mind-blowing. He doesn't move the rook away, stays true to his principles, and brings his partner from 8 to c8, doubling up the rooks on the open file. Queen to d1, a super interesting move, and you'll see why in a moment. Black keeps up the pressure with b4, threatening a knight that simply retreats, counterattacking the queen, which has to fall back to g4. And here is where the most interesting part of the game begins. Knight to c1. Watch this closely because you probably need to see it several times. At this moment, a queen exchange is being threatened. With this discovered attack by the knight, a queen exchange is being threatened. Do you know how Shirov responds? This game definitely deserves to be on the channel. Who's defending the queen? The knight. Well, look. Knight to d4. Yes, yes. If you want, go ahead and take my queen. There's absolutely no problem. I'm giving it to you. Totally free. At this point, a lot of you would be thinking one of two things. Either my opponent is a genius like Fischer, or he just blundered his queen, which is also possible. How can we tell the difference between the two? Well, before accepting a gift like this, we need to carefully calculate what's going on, and in this case, see what the opponent did to give away the queen. Okay, a knight to e4, which threatens knight takes d2, right? If we take the queen, they take one of our bishops, at least at first glance. That's not enough of a prize to give up a queen, but if we look a little further, we notice something. Queen takes g4, knight takes d2 with check. The king has to escape, and after a move like b3, the rook is threatening rook to a4 checkmate, and that's truly unstoppable. Black's attack is just too strong. So you know what? That the queen can't be captured. For all of you who have a physical chessboard where you can play out the games, I recommend setting up this position and evaluating this queen for queen, knight for bishop, then coming over here and trying to get in with a rook. And if not, you'll see the other rook could also come in, and it would be spectacular. For example, sacrificing the knight on c5 and then bringing in the other rook. This variation gives me goosebumps. You're gonna love it. You already know that I always buy my boards always at chessies.ar because I think it's the best store, plain and simple. And as a thank you for showing their boards from this company, which for me is hands down the best in all of Europe, they give us a 15% discount. If you want a board like this one, or any other professional board, all of you who are chess geeks like me and love this stuff, you can simply use the code ChessTeacher. No problem at all, and you'll get a discount. Instead of capturing queens, White said, look, I'm attacking your queen with my bishop. If you leave it there, I'll take it, and you'll lose the mate, because my bishop is guarded by my queen. And then Shirov says, well, let's not go that far, right? So he pulled his queen back. The player with the white pieces keeps up the pressure, and we could keep going from here, right? Like the hare and the mouse, just going back and forth like that the whole time, but nothing would really happen, right? It would just be a draw by repetition, and of course, Shirov didn't want to settle for a draw. That's why, instead of repeating moves, he brought another piece into the party. What is Shirov threatening now with this knight? We should always ask ourselves what our opponent is threatening. Nothing less than knight to g4, with deadly threats. With deadly threats, for example, with f2, honestly, this position with both knights coming in here is completely advantageous for black, and that's why white comes up with a plan that at first seems good, but ends up sealing the game for black. Look, white plays g4, and, well, sticking to his plan, Shirov just gives up the knight. Exactly. Why? Because now, after rook takes knight, he can recapture with the rook, giving up the queen again. Has anything changed? Well, no, honestly, nothing has changed at all. But in this case, the player with the white pieces did us the favor of accepting the sacrifice, and that's how we get to see this beautiful finish here. If he hadn't taken the queen, the game would have been a huge advantage for black. For example, they could have captured here. They could have brought both rooks down the file, pushed this pawn, and then brought in the bishop. But the good thing in this game is that white accepted the gift and we got to see this amazing, beautiful finish right here. Knight takes d2 check is similar to what would have happened a moment ago. Not exactly the same, but similar. The king has to move, and now it's much easier than before because after rook takes knight, white resigned because it would be checkmate, and a really beautiful checkmate in just a few moves after rook takes and rook takes. The only way to continue would be to move the king, or if you want to drag it out a bit more, give up the bishop, and after rook takes, and with the kings lined up, checkmate would come thanks to this pawn. b3 checkmate, since the king can't escape thanks to the dark squared bishop. And that's how one of the most beautiful games without a doubt that I remember ended, in this case by Alexei Shirov. Friends, I definitely recommend you join the Academy now, especially since you can do it for just €1. You have absolutely nothing to lose, and you'll see that you're in for a pleasant surprise, because if you like this lesson, you'll like the ones in the Academy just as much or even more. And on top of that, you get full access to ChessMind, which, as you know, is the best chess app out there. The only downside is that it's a paid app, right? Not everything in life can be perfect. By joining the Academy, you get it completely free. It's 100% included, so you get all lessons and ChessMind for just €1. You try it for 7 days, and if you don't like it, you leave. Nothing happens at all. Honestly, it would hurt me a little, to be sincere. But the good thing is, I'm seeing that so few of you are leaving. That's what really makes me happy. I'm saying that it's the right move to let you try this week for just €1, because even though of course we lose a lot of money during this week, the fact that you join, see how great the Academy is, how much fun you have inside, and the personalized attention I give you, well, most of you end up deciding to stay in the family. So I hope you really enjoyed this video. You'll find it in the description below, and I'll see you tomorrow, just like always, because I'll be back in the next video. Goodbye.